Hi, and welcome back to History 101 or Political Science 101. It is the history of the American political system. We are on Chapter 9, and this is Part 2 of Chapter 9, which is Campaigns and Elections. We're on page 195. I really want to draw some attention to where they talk about elections in other parts of the world, especially the example in Egypt. I really want to encourage you to look up the word Arab Spring. Often when different Arabic nations decide to change their political stances, sometimes we call that an Arab Spring. I went to a lovely seminar about it, and the speaker was actually in Egypt when all this was going on, and he talked about a lot about how Facebook was actually used in order for the protests and that sort of thing. So there was a Facebook page, and it was actually used to try and get democracy started, and there was a lot of back and forth and that sort of thing. Okay, the winner-take-all system, we're talking about the presidential election and electoral college. It is a little confusing. Very interesting. Read this slowly. It's usually a winner-take-all system, except for Maine and Nebraska. So the largest popular vote in a state is credited with all that state's electoral college votes, but not Maine and Nebraska. So still we have this, states have rights to make their own rules about the Electoral College. I love page 196, has a lovely map with the electoral votes and what's needed. It goes into that in lots of detail. Going to be very, very good thing if you read this slowly so that you understand the coverage in the elections that are coming up in November. Okay, the size of each state reflects the number of electoral votes that a state has following the changes required by the 2010 census. The colors show which party the state voted for in 2012. Red for Republican, blue for Democrat. A candidate must win 270 electoral votes to be elected president, and there's 538 electoral votes. So, Kentucky has 8 electoral votes, which is right across the river. We're in Cincinnati, Ohio, but many of you are in Kentucky. Ohio has 18 electoral college votes. Indiana has 11. So that would be our tri-state area. It's all very close. Indiana, Kentucky, and Ohio. Indiana and Kentucky both voted Republican in 2012, and Ohio went Democrat 2012. Very interesting to kind of look at it. You can kind of see the Bible Belt is more Republican, which is amazing now, right? Because that switch happened, during the days of Lincoln. Republicans were not in the South, and then that kind of switched over with FDR and in the 1930s. Okay, what it takes to win. Controversial cases in presidential elections. Wow. Very interesting. The 2000 race between Al Gore and George W. Bush, just amazing. It was so close. And the hanging chads, I don't know if you recall hearing about this, but the hanging chads, you had to have like a punch hole system, and if the punch wasn't all the way through, they couldn't count it. So it was just barely punched. It was just really a huge controversy because the system for voting was actually not very good. And so they had hanging chads, which would be that little piece of paper hanging. Really interesting. And actually, if I'm not mistaken, Al Gore actually won the popular vote. That means the voters in the United States that voted, most of them voted for him. But because of the Electoral College, George W. Bush won. So just really interesting, controversial cases. And you know what? The big news is there have been crazier campaigns than even the one that's coming up, lots of debate and that sort of thing. There have been crazy campaigns in the past, and the more you study each presidential, election, you realize that this is not, this crazy stuff has happened before. So it's interesting. The caucus system, again, read it carefully because it is a little, confusing. Okay. The primary elections and loss of party control. Primaries are all very different. The first primary, I wanted to highlight that on page 198. Very cool. First primary election may have been held in 1842 by Democrats in Crawford County, Pennsylvania. And it was a way to, elect their candidate that they wanted to put on the presidential platform. And elections have changed a lot. Like before, it would be, the guy who got the most votes and the guy who got the second most votes. Early on in our nation's history, the one with the most votes would be president, and the one with the second would be vice president. And it wouldn't matter if they're on the same, party platform or same party or not. So very interesting when you look into the history again. Voter turnouts. This is so interesting. And I would like to study, more. I would like to hear more of this, read some more articles on this. Those who turn out for the primaries, and my son and I went and voted in the primary. Interesting. We, shared a lot of information. My son's 20. He's going to be a junior, and he's a political science and history double major. I think he's going to be communications as well, triple major. So we have some really great discussions. Not only that, but he watches the political news coverage constantly, and his little brothers, which are 10 and 12, sit next to him and watch them with him. I would never do that if it was my brothers and sisters, but they do. And they ask questions, and they're very informed because they want to be like their big brother. But anyway, so voter turnout for primaries is obviously, this makes sense, it's lower than the general election that happens in November. But this is where it gets really interesting, and our book has actually said this quite a few times. It is the Republican primary election is extremely, it's more conservative, okay? But the Democratic primary voters are more liberal than normal. So you have these two polarities, these two extremes, binaries, okay, where you have people coming out for the primaries and they're very, very, opposites. But then the candidates that are trying to get the primary support, then they move more towards the middle. And not towards, extreme liberal or extreme conservatism. So really interesting, really, really, really interesting that they're trying to, but that's the voters that come out. Closed primaries, only parties can vote. Some of them have it open, it's so crazy. Or you can choose and pick and choose. This is hilarious. Beginning in 1977. Louisiana had a unique system in which all candidates participated in the same primary regardless of party. The two candidates receiving the most votes then proceeded on to the general election, which could be problematic if you think about it, because you want to give, in fairness, both Democrat and Republican can have a candidate, and this is not happening. And then when you begin to spin that and remember, okay, what happened in the South? Okay, we had several things going on to keep blacks from voting, okay? The grandfather clause. Was your grandfather a slave? Did he own land? If it was either of those, if he didn't own land, he was a slave, you can't vote. The literacy tests, which were absurd. And it was just like they would just fail you anyway, because we know Rosa Parks took a literacy test 3 times and was not permitted to vote. She had a college education, and she was the secretary of the NAACP. So that is definitely smelling of dirty dealings. Sometimes your votes, sometimes your votes would disappear. There were just all kinds of loopholes in the South. So to see that this Louisiana model, just the top 2 voters would be the people who would hold the primary positions. Not good, not fair, especially when you know that there's like oppression and people are not actually going by the rules and being fair. anyway, so the Louisiana model, the two candidates receiving the most votes in the general election in 2008, as late as 2008. Louisiana abandoned this jungle primary, is what it was called, for the U.S. House and Senate, but kept it for the state and local offices. However, Louisiana restored the system for all offices. So that's just weird. I just would want to study that and see what the fairness is about that. Okay. A lot of different kinds of primaries, the invisible primary. This is crazy too on page 200, where it talks about in recent years, unofficial presidential campaigns have often begun as much as 3 years before election day. So people are looking for that position of president, and they're really trying to make, get their name out there, meet people, talk to people, that sort of thing. Okay, presidential primaries, front loading. Oh, this is where the states want their primary to happen first, to kind of set the tone of the country. And, Ohio is not, say Kentucky was earlier than Ohio. I'd have to check that out to make sure that I'm giving you the right information, but I'm pretty sure Kentucky went before Ohio did. Okay, states have held the presidential primaries at various times over the first 6 months of a presidential election year. Many of them have moved the dates because they want to have a bigger impact on who is picked as president. Super Tuesday. A bunch of southern states created this. I know Iowa is very important. I'm not sure if it's first. I'm pretty sure it is, but I will check on that for you. Okay. This is hilarious. If you read on page 202, Toward 2016, very new book, very progressive. It talks about Hillary Clinton. She, in the Democratic field, her dominance, that she will most likely be a candidate in the 2016 elections, which she is. The polls in 2014 place her 50 percentage points ahead of the next popular candidate, Vice President Joe Biden. Okay, and then they talk about potential candidates for Republican. New Jersey Governor Chris Christie. And then what happened there? Well, there was a bridge scandal, and he kind of, filtered out. Jeb Bush, okay. Rand Paul, Kentucky State Senator. All right. Paul Ryan, Wisconsin Representative. Ted Cruz, all these familiar names that we know and that we definitely have heard. Marco Rubio, and there is no mention of Donald Trump in here at all. Now, I'm going to try and find another podcast. You guys did fantastic with these podcasts, and I love This American Life. It is just so eye-opening. I don't always agree with it. It is really to make you think, but there is one about why Trump really grabbed hold and snowballed and became the Republican nomination. And it's pretty eye-opening. It's about a guy who actually his job is to predict who's going to be president or who's going to run, and his data and his numbers, they weren't right. So what he always does when he doesn't get it right, because he is like a data analyst, he went back and was like, why? So it's really very interesting. And I don't play these for you in order to sway you or get you to pick who you wish to vote for. I play these things for you to get you to think. And I love when you write in your discussion forums, this really made me think. That means I've done my job. So we're going to dance around the elections. We're going to continue to do that because this is a political science class. But we're not going to do it to sway you one way or the other. Just want you to think clearly, openly, logically, not attacking people just because you don't like them or calling them this or that, but like actually using factual-based evidence and criteria just to get you to think. Interesting perspective to use. All right, make sure that you read the rest of your chapter